The letter had arrived on black parchment, sealed with crimson wax that bore no crest, only the impression of a single thorn. You are summoned to claim what is yours by blood. Margot Ashford stood before the iron gates of Thornhaven Manor, as twilight bled across the Yorkshire moors, painting the Gothic spires in shades of dying light. The estate rose from the earth like a monument to forgotten centuries, all crumbling stone and ivy-choked towers, windows dark as empty eyes watching her approach. She should have refused. Should have burned the letter, and remained in London, safe in her modest rooms above the bookshop, where she catalogued other people's histories, instead of confronting her own. But her great-aunt Vivienne had left her this place. Only this place, no explanation, no warning, just a deed bearing Margot's name, and that strange summons written in silver ink that seemed to shimmer even in darkness. The gates opened at her touch, groaning like something awakening from a long sleep. This is madness, she thought, even as her feet carried her forward down the overgrown drive. The November wind cut through her traveling cloak, carrying the scent of dead roses and something else, something metallic and ancient that made her pulse quicken with an instinct she couldn't name. The manor's front doors stood ajar. Hello. Her voice echoed through the cavernous entrance hall, swallowed by shadows that seemed to move independently of the dying light. Dust motes danced in the air like captured spirits. A grand staircase curved upward into darkness, its balustrade carved with impossible details, thorns and roses intertwined, creatures that were neither beast nor human frozen in eternal pursuit. She'd expected abandonment, decay. Instead, candles flickered to life along the walls, one by one, as if invisible hands had lit them at her arrival. Miss Ashford. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a sound like velvet draped over broken glass. It resonated in her chest, in her very bones, awakening something that had slept there all her life. Margot spun toward the shadows beneath the staircase. He emerged like darkness taking form, tall, impossibly elegant, dressed in black that belonged to another century entirely. His face was a study in aristocratic severity, high cheekbones, a mouth that looked as if it had forgotten how to smile, eyes the color of winter nights that held centuries of accumulated sorrow. His hair fell past his shoulders, black as raven wings, and when he moved, it was with a predator's grace that made her heart hammer against her ribs. You shouldn't have come. His voice held an accent she couldn't place, old as the stones themselves. This place is not meant for the living. It's mine. The words emerged stronger than she felt. The deed, formality. He stepped closer, and she saw that his skin was pale as moonlight, flawless and cold, looking as marble. Your bloodline has held this estate in trust for 300 years. That does not make it safe for you to claim. Then why was I summoned? Something flickered across his beautiful, terrible face, pain so profound it made her chest ache in sympathy. Because traditions must be honored. Because the last of the Ashford line must be offered the choice. What choice? He stood before her now, close enough that she should have felt the warmth of another body. Instead, there was only a chill that raised goosebumps along her arms, not entirely unpleasant. It felt like standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable. To accept your inheritance fully. His gaze held hers, and she saw hunger there, carefully leashed but unmistakable. Or to walk away and never return. Who are you? I am the reason your ancestors built these walls. I am the curse and the guardian, the prisoner and the keeper of this domain. He raised one hand, as if to touch her cheek, then stopped, his fingers trembling inches from her skin. I am Lord Evander Blackthorne, and I have not touched a living soul in 200 years. Why not? The question escaped before wisdom could restrain it. His laugh was bitter as winter wind. Because my touch brings death, Miss Ashford. Because I am cursed to desire what I cannot have, to hunger for warmth while remaining forever cold. Your great aunt understood this. She kept her distance, maintained the bloodline's duty without ever setting foot inside these walls. Then why did she send me here? Evander's eyes darkened to black. Because she discovered something before she died. Something that changes everything. He turned away abruptly, and she glimpsed something inhuman in the movement, too fluid, too fast. When he faced her again, candlelight caught the sharp points of elongated cannons. You are immune, Margot Ashford. Her name on his lips felt like a caress and a claim. Your blood carries something that has not appeared in your family line for 10 generations. You could touch me without dying. The words hung between them like a challenge and a confession. Prove it, she whispered, though every rational thought screamed that she should run. Evander's composure cracked. You don't understand what you're asking. I have existed for 5 centuries in isolation, surrounded by the living yet unable to feel a single moment of warmth. If I touch you, if I allow myself even one moment of contact, I may never be able to stop. Margot extended her hand into the space between them. Their eyes locked, and she saw the moment his legendary control began to fracture. His hand closed around hers. The contact sent a shock through Margot's entire body. Not pain, but something far more dangerous. His skin was cold as winter stone, yet where their palms met, heat bloomed like a forbidden flower opening to moonlight. She gasped, and Evander's grip tightened reflexively before he forced himself to gentle his hold. Impossible. He breathed, staring at their joined hands as if witnessing a miracle or a damnation. You're warm. You're alive beneath my touch. She should have been afraid. Every instinct inherited from generations of Ashfords who had maintained this terrible guardianship should have screamed at her to flee. Instead, she felt only a strange rightness, as if her entire life had been leading to this moment in this cursed manner, with this beautiful monster's hand wrapped around hers. How long has it been? She asked softly. Since you touched another person. 217 years. His thumb traced across her knuckles with devastating tenderness. The last was a servant girl who didn't understand the warnings. She died in my arms, her heart stopping the moment I reached for her. After that, I learned to exist in exile even among those who served this house. I'm not dying. No. Wonder and something darker, something hungry, flickered across his aristocratic features. You are very much alive. He released her abruptly and turned away, one hand braced against the carved balustrade as if he needed its support. In the candlelight, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigidity of a man, a creature fighting against its own nature. You should retire to the East Wing, he said, his voice rough. The rooms have been prepared. Tomorrow the estate's solicitor will arrive to explain your inheritance in full. Then you may decide whether to accept the burden of Thornhaven, or to sign it over to the crown and return to your ordinary life. And you? Margot found herself stepping closer despite his clear dismissal. What happens to you if I leave? Evander's laugh held centuries of bitterness. I continue as I have always continued. Alone. Unchanging. Watching the seasons turn through windows I cannot open. Surrounded by warmth I cannot feel. Existing in the space between death and damnation. That's not existence. That's hell. Less. He turned back to face her, and the raw agony in his eyes made her breath catch. But it is the hell I earned. I was transformed against my will, then cursed for sins I committed in my rage and grief. The witch who bound me ensured I would suffer eternally, alive but unable to truly live, surrounded by beauty I could never touch. Margot moved closer still, drawn by an instinct she didn't understand. What sins? I killed her daughter. The confession fell between them like a stone into still water. Elena, she was innocent and I was newly turned. Mad with bloodlust and the horror of what had been done to me. When I realized what I'd taken from the world, what I'd become, the witch's curse seemed merciful compared to my own self-hatred. He expected horror, revulsion. Instead, Margot saw only the weight of centuries pressing down on this creature, who looked like a fallen angel carved from marble and shadow. You were a monster then? She said quietly. What are you now? Evander's eyes widened slightly. Still a monster. Always a monster. No. She closed the remaining distance between them, standing so close she could see the subtle patterns in his irises, silver veins through midnight. Monsters don't isolate themselves to protect others. Monsters don't carry guilt for 2 centuries. Monsters don't look at me the way you're looking at me now. And how am I looking at you? His voice dropped to a whisper that resonated through her entire body, like I'm salvation and temptation wrapped in the same skin. A shudder ran through him. You have no idea how dangerous your perceptiveness is, Margot Ashford. Then tell me. She raised her hand again, letting it hover near his face. Tell me why I can touch you when no one else can. Tell me why my great aunt sent me here knowing what you are. For a long moment, he remained frozen, warring with himself. Then he leaned forward infinitesimally, allowing her fingertips to brush his cheek. The touch ignited something primal in the space between them. Evander's eyes bled to pure black, and when his lips parted on a ragged exhale, she saw his fangs fully extended, sharp and pearl white and absolutely lethal. But he didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his face into her palm like a man starved for affection, his cold skin drinking in her warmth with a desperation that was almost painful to witness. Your bloodline carries ancient magic, he said, his voice breaking. The original Ashfords were not merely wealthy landowners. They were blood witches who bound supernatural creatures with contracts written in their own veins. Your great-aunt discovered that you inherited the gift undiluted, something that hasn't manifested in 10 generations. What does that mean? It means you could unmake my curse. His hand came up to cover hers, pressing her palm harder against his face. Or bind me more completely than the witch who damned me. Your blood holds power over creatures like me, Margot. Power I have not felt directed at me since the night I was cursed. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt only a deep, resonant certainty. Do you belong to anyone? The question emerged as barely a whisper. Evander's control shattered visibly. He pulled her against him with inhuman speed, one arm wrapped around her waist, while his other hand tangled in her hair. His face buried in the curve of her neck, and she felt the sharp points of his fangs pressing against her skin, not breaking, just resting there as he dragged in a shaking breath that carried her scent. No, he groaned against her throat. I belong to no one. I am bound to this house, to this curse, to an eternity of isolation. Margot's fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, feeling the unnaturally still chest beneath. No heartbeat, no breath except what he chose to take. Then perhaps, she whispered into the darkness of the ancestral hall. It's time that changed. Evander released her as if her skin had suddenly turned to holy fire. He stood across the hall in the next instant. She hadn't even seen him move, his chest heaving with unnecessary breaths, his eyes still that fathomless black. The control he'd maintained for centuries hung by a thread so fine she could almost see it fraying in the candlelit darkness. You don't understand what you're offering, he said, his voice raw. The bond between a blood witch and a vampire is not symbolic. It's written in flesh and soul, irreversible and absolute. If you bind me, I become yours in ways that transcend mortal comprehension. And if I unbind you... Margot's hand went to her throat where his fangs had pressed, finding her pulse racing beneath her fingertips. Then I would be free. Something like fear flickered across his beautiful face. Free to leave these walls. Free to walk in the world again. Free to become the monster I was when first transformed, with no curse to temper my nature. You think you'd hurt people. I know I would. He turned toward the darkened windows, his reflection absent in the glass, another curse, another reminder of his inhuman nature. The bloodless never fades, Margot. It only becomes manageable through centuries of denial. Without the curse binding me here, limiting my strength, I would be as I was, unstoppable, insatiable. The witch knew this when she crafted my prison. She made me powerful enough to suffer immortality, but contained enough to prevent me from spreading that suffering. Margot studied his profile, the sharp nobility of his features, the ancient sorrow carved into every line. My great-aunt Vivienne visited this house once, didn't she? Before I was born. Evander went very still. How did you know? Because she wrote about you. Margot reached into her traveling bag and withdrew a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. I found this among her effects. She never married, never had children, spent her entire fortune maintaining this estate from a distance. I thought she was merely eccentric. Now I understand she was carrying a secret. She opened the journal to a marked page and read aloud by candlelight. I met him tonight, the creature who dwells in Thornhaven's heart. He is not the monster the family histories describe, but a soul in torment, trapped by ancient magic and his own guilt. I wanted to help him, to offer him the absolution he cannot grant himself. But I am not the one. The blood gift runs too thin in my veins. I can only maintain the wards and wait. Wait for the daughter of my line who will carry the old power strong enough to make a choice that should never have been forced upon him. Freedom or binding. Damnation or salvation. I pray she has the wisdom to know which is which. Silence filled the hall like water rising. She touched you, Margot said softly, closing the journal. Didn't she? Once. Evander's voice was barely audible. For 3 seconds before the curse took her. She collapsed, and I carried her to the gates, left her where the groundskeeper would find her. She survived, but I saw in her eyes that she understood the price of contact. She never returned to the manor itself again. But she didn't abandon you. No. He finally turned back to face her, and his eyes had returned to their winter night shade, still inhuman, but controllable. She maintained the estate, ensured I had what passes for comfort in my existence. Fresh blood procured from legitimate sources, books delivered to the library, music for the phonograph, small kindnesses from a woman who understood I was both prisoner and guardian. Margot moved toward the grand staircase, running her hand along the carved balustrade. Now that she looked closer, she could see the artistry wasn't merely decorative, it told a story. A man transformed beneath a blood moon. A woman with raised hands calling down lightning. A mansion rising from bare earth, its foundations laid with thorns and roses intertwined. "This is your story," she murmured, tracing the images. The curse made manifest in wood and stone. The original Ashfords were thorough in their craft. Evander ascended the stairs with that preternatural grace, stopping beside her. "When they bound me here after the witch's death, they ensured I would never forget what I was, what I'd done, what I'd become. Every surface carries a reminder. Every shadow holds a memory." His hand hovered over the carving, not quite touching. "Would you like to see it? The moment I was transformed." "How?" "Blood memory." He met her eyes, and she saw reluctance warring with something else, a need to be understood, to share the burden of his centuries. "Your blood witch heritage allows you to see through the veil between past and present. If you're willing to let me take a single drop of your blood, I can show you the truth of what happened. No lies, no justifications. Only memory preserved in the blood itself." Margot's pulse quickened. Everything she'd been taught about safety, about strangers, about creatures that fed on human life screamed at her to refuse. But her great-aunt had sent her here for a reason. Had left her this inheritance knowing it would bring her face to face with Evander Blackthorn and the impossible choice that awaited. "Will it hurt?" she asked. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first she'd seen, and it transformed his face from coldly beautiful to devastatingly so. "No. I've had centuries to perfect control when I choose to use it." She extended her hand, palm up. Evander drew a small silver knife from his coat, ornate, ancient. The blade inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. "The witch used this to bind me. It's the only blade that can draw blood for magical purposes within these walls." He pressed the point to her fingertip, so gentle she barely felt the prick. A single drop of crimson welled up, perfect as a ruby in the candlelight. Evander caught it on his finger and raised it to his lips. The world dissolved into memory and blood and a darkness that had teeth. The vision slammed into Margot with the force of a physical blow. She was no longer standing in Thornhaven Manor, but in a forest clearing beneath a full moon that seemed too large, too red. A blood moon that painted everything in shades of crimson and shadow. She could smell damp earth and copper, hear the rustle of leaves in a wind that carried winter's bite, and she could feel Evander, not as the controlled, elegant creature who haunted the manor's halls, but as he had been human, alive, his heart racing with terror and rage. "Please," a woman's voice begged from the darkness. "Please, my lord, you must understand, understand." Evander's voice, but different, warmer, rougher, edged with an accent Margot now recognized as belonging to the 18th century. "You murdered my wife. You took her from our bed and drained her while I slept under the same roof, oblivious. What is there to understand?" The scene shifted, and Margot saw him clearly, younger looking despite being in his 30s, dressed in nobleman's attire now torn and bloodied. His hair was shorter then, tied back in the fashion of the time, and his eyes were blue, painfully, humanly blue. Before him stood a woman in a crimson cloak, her face hidden in shadow save for eyes that gleamed with an inhuman light. "Your wife was promised to me before you stole her heart," the vampire said, her voice like silk over razors. "What I took was mine by right of prior claim, but I am not without mercy. Lord Blackthorn, join me. Become what I am, live forever as I have lived. I would rather die. Then die you shall." She moved faster than thought, and suddenly Evander was on his knees, her fangs buried in his throat. Margot felt his pain, his horror, the sensation of his life draining away into the creature's mouth. But worse than the physical agony was the violation, the invasion of something cold and alien pouring into him with each swallow of stolen blood. The vampire released him, and he collapsed onto the forest floor. "You cannot die now," she whispered, crouching beside him. "I've given you my blood in exchange for yours. In 3 nights, you will rise as one of us. Then you will understand what your wife refused. That mortality is a prison, and I offer only freedom." The scene fractured, reformed. Now Evander stood in a stone chamber lit by torches, his eyes no longer blue but black as endless night. A young woman cowered in the corner, barely 20, dark-haired, beautiful in her terror. "Elena," he said, his voice breaking. "Forgive me. I can't control. Father, please!" she screamed. "Someone help me." But there was no one, only Evander newly transformed, drowning in bloodlust that obliterated reason and mercy. Margot felt his internal war, the human soul screaming against what his body demanded, the monster that had been forced into him overriding every civilized impulse. He fell on the girl like a beast. When reason returned, Elena lay dead in his arms, her neck torn open. her blood painting his hands and mouth. And standing in the doorway was an old woman, her face twisted with grief and rage that transcended human emotion. "You killed my daughter," she whispered. "My Elena. My light. My only child. I couldn't stop." Evander's anguish was a living thing, raw and terrible. "Please kill me. End this. I don't want to be this creature. Death would be mercy." The witch raised her hands, and lightning crackled between her fingers. "You will have something far more fitting. You will exist for eternity, Lord Blackthorn. But you will touch nothing living without bringing death. You will hunger for warmth while remaining forever cold. You will be imprisoned in the house that bears your name, surrounded by life you can never truly experience." She spoke words in a language that predated English, predated Latin, something ancient and furious that made the air itself scream. "And you will remain thus until one of her bloodline chooses your fate." The witch continued, gesturing to Elena's corpse. "Until an Ashford daughter, for I will ensure that name replaces yours in history, comes with power enough to either bind you completely or set you free. Let them decide if a monster who regrets his nature deserves damnation or redemption." The curse took hold, and Margot felt Evander's scream as his very essence was rewritten. Bound to the manor, unable to touch without killing, powerful enough to exist for centuries but contained enough to prevent him from spreading his curse. The vision shattered. Margot found herself back in the entrance hall, gasping, tears streaming down her face. Evander stood before her, his hand still raised from where he'd tasted her blood, his expression carved from ancient suffering. "Now you know," he said quietly. "I am not a romantic figure, Margot. I am a killer who lost control, a man who destroyed an innocent girl in his first hours as a monster. The curse is not unjust. It is exactly what I deserve." Margot wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "Elena wasn't your wife's daughter." He blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "No, she was the vampire's daughter, born before her mother's transformation, kept alive through dark magic. I didn't know that when I killed her. I knew only hunger, and the Ashford name, the witch's mortal surname. She ensured my estate would pass to Elena's distant cousins, the only family she had left. They became the Ashfords who would guard me, maintain my prison, and eventually produce the one who could make the final judgment." Margot stepped closer, and Evander tensed but didn't retreat. "You've suffered for 2 centuries, she said softly. "Alone, unable to feel warmth or comfort, trapped with your guilt and your grief. When does punishment become cruelty, Lord Blackthorn? When it ends before justice is satisfied. And who decides when justice is satisfied?" She raised her hand to his face again, felt him tremble at her touch. "A grief-mad witch. A god who allows creatures like vampires to exist, or the man who has paid and paid and paid until there's nothing left but an eternal sentence." Evander closed his eyes. "Don't offer me hope, Margot. I cannot bear it." "Then what can you bear?" He opened his eyes and they were black again, but this time with desire rather than bloodlust. "You," he whispered. "God help me, I can bear you." Morning came to Thornhaven Manor like an unwelcome guest. Margot woke in a 4-poster bed draped in midnight velvet, disoriented by dreams that blurred the line between memory and vision. She'd seen Evander's transformation a dozen more times in her sleep, each iteration revealing new layers of tragedy, new depths of his self-loathing. Sunlight streamed through the east wing windows, and she realized with a start that she was truly alone. Whatever magic bound Evander to this house, it kept him confined to the windowless chambers and shadowed halls where daylight never reached. A knock at her door made her jump. "Miss Ashford." A woman's voice, elderly and refined. "I'm Mrs. Hartwell, the housekeeper. The solicitor has arrived. Lord Blackthorn requests your presence in the library at your earliest convenience." Margot dressed quickly in the gown that had been laid out, dark green silk that seemed too fine for a woman of her modest means, yet fit her perfectly. When she examined it closely, she found it was not new but impeccably preserved, the style belonging to decades past. Vivian's, she realized. My great-aunt left her own clothes here. The library was a cathedral of books, 3 stories tall with spiral staircases leading to balconies lined with volumes in a dozen languages. Morning light slanted through stained glass windows depicting scenes from mythology, Prometheus bound, Persephone descending, Orpheus looking back, all stories of curses and impossible choices. Evander stood in the shadows near the fireplace, as far from the sunlight as the room allowed. He wore different clothes now. A more modern suit in charcoal gray, though still with that timeless elegance that marked him as belonging to no single era. His eyes tracked her movement across the room with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Miss Ashford." An elderly man rose from a leather chair, his suit precisely tailored, his silver hair combed back from a face lined with professional discretion. "I am Mr. Cornelius Thorne, your great-aunt's solicitor. Please sit." Margot settled into a chair opposite him. Acutely aware of Evander's presence in her peripheral vision, a dark figure watching from the margins of light. "Your great-aunt's will is quite straightforward in its legal elements." Mr. Thorne began, producing documents from a leather case. "You inherit Thornhaven Manor, its grounds, and a considerable trust established to maintain the estate in perpetuity. However, there are additional considerations that fall outside conventional law. The curse," Margot said quietly. Mr. Thorne's eyebrows rose slightly. "Lord Blackthorne has informed you, then. That simplifies matters." He glanced toward the shadows where Evander stood. "My family has served as intermediaries between the Ashford line and the Manors, resident for 6 generations. We are privy to certain truths that cannot be spoken of in common society. You know what he is. I know what circumstances have made him." "Yes." The solicitor's expression remained professionally neutral. "Your great-aunt consulted extensively with my father before her death. She believed she had discovered something crucial about the original curse, information that had been lost over the centuries as the story passed from one generation to the next." Evander moved closer, still avoiding the sunlight but drawn by curiosity. "What information?" Mr. Thorne withdrew an aged scroll, its parchment yellow as old bone, sealed with the same thornless wax that had marked Margot's summons. "This was found among Elena's possessions, the girl whose death precipitated the curse. Your great-aunt spent decades tracking it through obscure archives and private collections. It's written in her hand, dated 3 days before her death." He broke the seal and unrolled the parchment, revealing text in faded ink that shimmered with the same silver quality as the letter that had brought Margot to Yorkshire. "Mother." Mr. Thorne read aloud, "I write this knowing I will not survive to deliver it myself. The vampire who claims to love me grows more possessive daily, and I fear what she will do when Lord Blackthorne's wife refuses her demands. But you must know this: I am not innocent in what comes. I begged her to transform him, believing that only as one of her kind could he escape the marriage that entraps him and be with me freely. I thought I was offering salvation. Instead, I have damned us both. If he comes to you in madness, if his newfound hunger takes me, know that I forgive him. Know that the curse you will surely cast should not be eternal. He is a victim as much as I, manipulated by love and dark magic beyond mortal comprehension. Promise me, Mother, promise that one day, someone will offer him mercy." Silence fell like snow in the library. Evander's voice, when he finally spoke, was broken glass and ashes. She knew. Elena knew what would happen. Not precisely, Mr. Thorne said gently. But she understood the danger she'd set in motion, and she begged her mother for your eventual redemption. Yet the witch cursed me anyway. Evander's hands clenched at his sides. Grief overrode her daughter's final wishes. Grief is its own curse. Margot said softly, understanding dawning. She couldn't bear to show you mercy when her daughter lay dead, but she built in the possibility, the Ashford bloodline, the eventual choice. She couldn't free you herself, but she ensured that someday someone could. Mr. Thorne nodded. Your great-aunt believed the curse was never meant to be eternal. It was meant to last until you appeared, a blood witch strong enough to rewrite what was written in rage and sorrow, with enough distance from the tragedy to see it clearly, to decide if he deserves freedom or further binding. Margot finished. Precisely. The solicitor gathered his documents with practiced efficiency. The choice is yours alone, Miss Ashford. Your blood, your magic, your judgment. Lord Blackthorne cannot influence you, nor can I. The curse was designed to respond only to an Ashford witch's freely given decision. He stood, preparing to leave. I will return in 3 days for your answer. That should give you sufficient time to understand the weight of what you've inherited. After Mr. Thorne departed, Margot and Evander remained in the library, she in sunlight, he in shadow, an impossible distance of mere feet between them. What will you choose? He asked, his voice barely audible. Margot turned to look at him fully, this creature of darkness and sorrow, who had touched her without killing her, who carried centuries of guilt like other men carried Braith. I don't know yet, she admitted, but I think. I need to understand you better first. Not just your past, but who you've become in all these years alone. Something flickered in his winter, night eyes, hope, or perhaps fear of hope. Then ask me anything, Evander said. I have nothing left to hide from you. The days that followed took on a strange rhythm, sunlit hours when Margot explored the manor's grounds alone. and twilight evenings when Evander emerged from the shadows to become her guide through Thornhaven's secrets. He showed her the portrait gallery where generations of Ashfords stared down with stern disapproval, their painted eyes following her movement through the hall. He led her through the conservatory where blooming flowers filled the air with heady perfume. He took her to the music room where a grand piano sat draped in dust, its keys untouched for decades. "I used to play," he admitted, running one pale hand above the keys without making contact. "Before, my wife loved Vivaldi, and I would play for her in the evenings." "Play now," Margot urged. "I haven't in 200 years." Then it's time he remembered. He sat at the bench, and after a moment's hesitation, his fingers touched the ivory keys. The sound that emerged was hesitant at first, rusty with disuse, but within moments muscle memory overcame time's passage. A sonata flowed through the darkened room, melancholy and beautiful, filled with a longing that made Margot's chest ache. When the final notes faded, she found tears on her cheeks. "You're not a monster," she whispered. "Monsters don't create beauty." Evander's hands stilled on the keys. "Beauty and monstrosity are not mutually exclusive, Margot. I could play you the most exquisite music ever composed, and still tear out your throat in the next breath, if the hunger took me. But you don't." She moved closer, drawn by an instinct she was beginning to trust. "You've had 3 days in my presence, close enough to touch, to taste. You haven't lost control once. Because you are not merely human to me anymore." He stood, and in the moonlight streaming through the windows, he looked like something carved from marble and shadow, too perfect to be real. "You are an Ashford. You are the witch who holds my fate in her hands. You are the first warm touch I've felt in centuries. If I lost control with you, I would lose everything. Is that the only reason you restrain yourself?" She closed the distance between them, standing near enough that her warmth should have affected him. "Fear of losing what little contact you've gained?" "No." His eyes darkened to that fathomless black. "It's because you deserve better than a monster's hunger disguised as affection. What if I told you I don't believe your hunger is the only thing you feel?" Evander's control fractured visibly. "Margot, I've watched you these past 3 days," she continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The way you move through these halls like you're afraid to disturb even the dust. The way you keep yourself in shadows not just because of the sun, but because you don't believe you deserve the light. The way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention, like I'm something precious and impossible. You are impossible." His hands clenched at his sides. "You should not exist. No Ashford should carry blood magic strong enough to touch me, to bind me, to unmake what a witch's grief created. Yet here you stand, offering me understanding I don't deserve." "Stop telling me what you don't deserve," Margot said fiercely. "Tell me what you want." The question hung in the air between them like a challenge and an invitation. "I want." Evander's voice broke. "I want to feel your warmth without the barrier of clothing. I want to know if your pulse races when I'm near because of fear or something else entirely. I want to taste your blood not from hunger but from intimacy, to share the bond that vampires and their chosen have known since the first of my kind walked the earth." He took a shuddering breath. "But more than all of that, I want to deserve these things. And I don't. I never will." "You're wrong." Margot reached up, her fingertips grazing his jaw. He trembled at the contact but didn't pull away. "Elena forgave you. She wrote it in her own hand. The witch who cursed you built in the possibility of redemption. Even your curse itself wasn't designed to last forever, only until someone could judge you with clear eyes. And what do your clear eyes see?" The question emerged as barely a whisper. "I see a man who has suffered beyond measure for a crime committed in madness." Her hand slid to his chest where no heart beat, where only stillness reigned. "I see centuries of isolation accepted as penance. I see someone who has forgotten how to believe he could be anything other than cursed." Evander caught her hand, pressing it harder against his chest. "There is no heartbeat, Margot. No warmth, no life. What you feel for me, this sympathy, this compassion, it's based on a tragedy, not on who I truly am. Then show me who you truly are." She stepped closer still until they were nearly touching. "Not the guilty prisoner, not the cursed lord. Show me Evander, without the weight of 200 years between us." For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then something shifted in his expression, a wall crumbling, a door opening after centuries locked shut. "I'm terrified," he admitted, his voice raw. "Terrified that if I allow myself to want you, to touch you beyond these careful moments, I won't be able to stop." terrified that the hunger will override everything else, and I'll become what I was that night with Alina, a mindless beast in the shape of a man. You're not that creature anymore. How can you be certain? Because that creature wouldn't be afraid. Margot raised her other hand to cup his face, holding him gently. That creature wouldn't care about my safety or my choices. That creature wouldn't have spent 3 days showing me music and gardens and beauty, when you could have tried to manipulate my decision. Evander's eyes slid closed, and she felt him lean into her touch with a desperation that transcended physical need. I want to believe you, he breathed. Then believe me. She rose on her toes, bringing her lips close to his ear. And let me see the hunger you've been hiding. His eyes snapped open, pure black now, his fangs fully descended. Be careful what you ask for, Margot Ashford, he warned, his voice dropping to something inhuman and ancient. I am still a vampire, regardless of how well I wear the mask of civilization. She smiled, fearless in a way that surprised them both. Good, she whispered. I'm tired of masks. Evander moved with inhuman speed, pinning her against the wall beside the piano with a gentleness that contradicted the predatory darkness in his eyes. His hands bracketed her head, caging her in without actually touching, and she could feel the tension vibrating through his entire body, centuries of restraint warring with hunger finally acknowledged. You don't understand what you're inviting, he said, his voice rough as gravel and silk combined. The bond between a vampire and a blood witch isn't merely feeding. It's a covenant written in the soul itself. Once established, it cannot be undone. Explain it to me. Margot's hands came to rest on his chest, feeling the unnatural stillness beneath her palms. Tell me what happens if I offer you my blood freely. A shudder ran through him. Your blood would recognize my nature and bind us together. You would feel what I feel, the hunger, the cold, the weight of immortality pressing down. I would taste not just your life force but your very essence, your magic, everything that makes you who you are. She tilted her head, exposing the curve of her throat in a gesture that was half trust, half challenge. What would you feel? Warmth. The word emerged as a prayer. For the first time in 2 centuries, I would feel genuine warmth. Your heartbeat would become an echo in my chest. Your emotions would bleed into mine. I would know your joy, your fear, your desire, all of it as intimately as my own thoughts. It sounds like marriage, Margot observed. It's more binding than any human marriage. Evander's eyes tracked the pulse in her throat with an intensity that should have terrified her. Death could part human spouses. Nothing parts a vampire from their bonded witch, except the complete destruction of one or both souls. You would be mine in every way that matters, and I would be yours, servant and protector, bound to your will through blood and magic. Servant. She felt his tension increase. The curse already makes you unable to leave these walls. What more could a bond add? The curse keeps me prisoner, he explained, his breath cool against her skin. A blood bond would make me yours by choice, compelled to protect you, to obey your commands, to place your life above my own existence. The witch who cursed me understood this. She ensured that if any Ashford established a bond with me, I would become their weapon, their shield, their creature to command. Understanding dawned in Margot's eyes. She didn't want you destroyed. She wanted you controlled. Elena's letter asked for mercy, and her mother provided it in the only way her grief allowed. Evander's hand finally made contact, his fingers trailing down Margot's arm with devastating tenderness. A blood bond with an Ashford would satisfy the curse's conditions. I would be bound eternally, but to a person rather than a place. Imprisoned still, but in a way Alina might have forgiven. I'd if I chose to free you instead. His eyes closed as if in pain. Then the curse would break completely. I would regain my full strength, be able to walk in daylight again, leave these walls forever. But without a bond to anchor me, without limitations to restrain the hunger, he trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish. You fear you'd become a monster again. I know I would. He opened his eyes, and they held such anguish that Margot's chest constricted. The curse has been my only morality for 200 years. Remove it, and what's left? A vampire with ancient power and no reason to resist his nature. The first time hunger struck, I would kill, and kill again, and again, until someone finally destroyed me or I'd left a trail of bodies across Europe. Margot's hand moved to his face, forcing him to meet her gaze. You're assuming the worst of yourself. I'm remembering what I was. His voice dropped to a whisper. That night with Alina, I tore her throat out like an animal. I drank until there was nothing left, and even then, I wanted more. That creature lives in me still, Margot. The curse keeps him chained, but he's always there, always hungry, always waiting for the restraints to slip. Or, she said softly, perhaps 200 years of isolation and guilt have taught you control you didn't possess then. Perhaps you're not the same man who was transformed against his will and thrown into madness. You have more faith in me than I have in myself. Then let me be your faith. She rose on her toes, bringing her lips close to his. Bond with me, Evander. Not as master and servant, but as partners choosing each other freely. Let me help you carry the weight you've borne alone for so long. Margot. His control hung by a thread. If I bond with you, I can never let you go. Your life would become mine to protect, your will mine to obey, your blood the only sustenance that would ever satisfy me again. Other humans would become meaningless compared to you. Would you hurt them anyway? These meaningless humans. The question caught him off guard. I know. Bonded vampires feed only from their chosen. The hunger for others fades to almost nothing. Then it's not imprisonment, Margot countered. It's salvation. For both of us. You gain warmth and connection. I gain the truth of what my bloodline was meant to provide. Not jailers for a monster, but companions for a cursed soul. Evander's forehead dropped to rest against hers, his eyes squeezed shut. You're offering me everything I've dreamed of for centuries. How can I accept it knowing what I am? But trusting that I see you more clearly than you see yourself. Her hands framed his face, holding him gently. By believing that Alina's forgiveness meant something. By having faith that 200 years of suffering has earned you the right to something other than eternal isolation. If I do this, if I accept, there's no going back. I know. You'll feel my hunger every time I feed. You'll carry the cold of my nature in your veins. You'll be bound to a creature who doesn't age, doesn't breathe, doesn't die. I know, she repeated, unwavering. Evander opened his eyes, and they were still black but no longer with hunger alone. Desire and hope and terror mingled in their depths. Then say it, he whispered. Say the words that will bind us, and I swear I will spend eternity trying to deserve this gift. Margot took a steadying breath. Feeling the weight of her bloodline's magic rising to the surface, ancient power that had slept in her veins waiting for this moment. I, Margot Ashford, Blood Witch of the Old Line, offer you covenant freely given, she said, and felt the words resonate with power. Take my blood and bind yourself to me, not as prisoner, but as chosen companion. Evander's fangs gleamed in the moonlight. Then I accept, he breathed, and struck. Pain bloomed where his fangs pierced her throat, sharp and bright as a struck match, then dissolving into something else entirely. Warmth. Not the warmth of her own body, but heat flooding into her from Evander's mouth as he drank, as if the blood flowing between them carried fire instead of life. Margot gasped, her hands clutching his shoulders, and felt the exact moment the bond snapped into place. It was like a door opening in her chest that she'd never known existed. Suddenly she could feel him, not just his physical presence, but his very essence pouring into her awareness. 200 years of loneliness crashed over her like a wave, so profound and absolute that she cried out. The cold that had lived in his bones for centuries seeped into her veins, making her shiver even as his arms wrapped around her, holding her upright. But beneath the cold and the hunger and the weight of immortal isolation, she felt something else. Relief. Joy. Wonder. Evander was feeling warmth for the first time in 2 centuries, and the sensation was so overwhelming that his hands trembled against her back. He pulled away from her throat with visible effort, his fangs retracting as he sealed the wound with his tongue, an instinct older than civilization. Blood stained his lips, and his eyes had returned to their winter, night shade, but now they held a light that transformed his entire face. Margot. He breathed, her name a revelation on his tongue. I can feel your heartbeat, inside me. Your life, your warmth, it's like sunlight in my veins. She swayed, dizzy from blood loss and the overwhelming rush of emotions that weren't entirely her own. Evander caught her, lifting her with inhuman ease and carrying her to a velvet settee near the windows. He settled her carefully, then knelt before her, his hands hovering over her arms as if he still couldn't quite believe he was allowed to touch her. How do you feel? Concern etched lines around his eyes. I took too much, I should have. I'm fine. Margot's voice came out breathless. Better than fine. I can feel you, Evander. Your emotions, your thoughts, it's like we're connected by invisible threads. The blood bond. He confirmed, his thumb tracing over her pulse point where his fangs had been. The wound had already closed, leaving only 2 small marks that would fade to silver scars. It will strengthen over the coming days. Eventually, we'll be able to sense each other's location, share thoughts if we choose, even feel physical sensations across the distance between us. And the curse. She reached up to touch his face, marveling at how his cold skin now felt different to her, not dead, but simply other. Did the bond break it? Evander closed his eyes, clearly testing the boundaries of his existence. Changed it. I can feel the walls of the manor differently now, not as prison bars but as parameters of my domain. I still cannot leave, but I no longer feel the crushing weight of magical chains. And my touch? He opened his eyes and deliberately pressed his palm flat against her cheek. Nothing happened except the pleasant chill of his skin against hers. I won't bring death to others anymore, he continued, wonder threading through his voice. The bond has given me what the curse took away. The ability to exist among the living without destroying them. Though I suspect I still cannot venture into sunlight, and I am certainly still bound to Thornhaven's walls, but you're free in every way that matters. Margot covered his hand with hers. You can touch. You can feel. You can exist without bringing death to everything you encounter. Because of you. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers with a tenderness that made her breath catch. Because you offered me something I never thought to receive. Not forgiveness, because that would imply I deserved it, but grace. Unmerited, freely given grace. Through the bond, Margot felt the enormity of what this meant to him. 2 centuries of believing he deserved nothing but suffering, suddenly confronted with genuine connection and the possibility of something beyond mere existence. You can feel my hunger now, he said quietly. The constant, gnawing need that never truly fades. Does it frighten you? She considered the question honestly, reaching inward to examine the new sensations flooding through the bond. Yes, she could feel his hunger, a deep, primal craving that lived in the very marrow of his being. But it wasn't the mindless beast she'd expected. It was controlled, directed, and now it was focused entirely on her in a way that felt less like threat and more like devotion. No, she answered truthfully. Because I can also feel your restraint, your control, the discipline you've built over centuries. The hunger is there, but it doesn't control you. You control it. With you, yes. His voice dropped to a whisper. Because you are precious to me in ways I don't have words to express. But without the bond, without you as my anchor, he shook his head. I would have been the monster I fear, Margot. You saved me from that fate. We saved each other. She pressed her hand over his heart where no beat resided. I was living half a life in London, cataloging other people's stories because I was too afraid to live my own. You gave me purpose. Magic. A destiny I never knew I was meant to fulfill. A destiny to be bound to a vampire. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the second she'd seen, and it still transformed him from beautiful to devastating. A destiny to choose love over fear. She leaned forward and kissed him softly, tasting her own blood on his lips and feeling no revulsion, only rightness. That's what this is, isn't it? What's growing between us? Evander pulled back enough to meet her eyes, and through the bond she felt his answer before he spoke it. A wave of emotion so powerful it stole her breath. Yes, he said simply. I think I began loving you the moment you offered me your hand in the entrance hall, knowing what I was and choosing to touch me anyway. Every moment since has only deepened what I feel until I cannot imagine existence without you in it. Then you won't have to. Margot smiled, feeling the truth of her own emotions crystallizing. Because I'm not going anywhere, Evander Blackthorn. You're mine now and I'm yours, and death itself won't part us. Death couldn't if it tried. He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands tangling in her hair. The bond is eternal, Margot. We have forever. Forever, she whispered against his lips. I think I can live with that. Through their connection, she felt his joy, pure and radiant and absolutely transcendent. For the first time in 200 years, Evander Blackthorn was not alone. 3 nights after the bonding, Margot woke to the taste of fear in her mouth, not her own, but Evander's, flooding through their connection like ice water in her veins. She bolted upright in bed, her hand going to the silver scars on her throat that marked their covenant. Through the bond, she felt him in the manor's depths, in the catacombs she hadn't yet explored, and he was hunting, no, being hunted. Margot threw on her dressing gown and ran barefoot through the darkened halls, following the thread of their connection like a lifeline. The bond pulled her toward the north wing, through a concealed door behind a tapestry, down stone stairs that spiraled into the earth where no moonlight reached. The catacombs were older than the manor itself, ancient stone passages lit by torches that burned with an unnatural blue flame. She could smell damp earth and something else, something that made her blood witch heritage rise in warning. Silver. Holy water, hawthorn wood, vampire hunter tools. Evander! Her voice echoed through the passages. Stay back. His shout came from somewhere ahead, edged with a fear she'd never heard from him. Margot, run, they're here for me, not you. Go! She rounded a corner and froze. Evander stood in the center of a circular chamber, surrounded by 5 figures in dark cloaks bearing the symbol of a red cross over a white shield. Vampire hunters, trained by the church to eliminate creatures of darkness. They'd arranged themselves in a pentagram formation, each holding silver chains that glowed with holy light, trapping Evander within their circle. The monster has a pet, one of them said. A woman with silver hair pulled back severely from a face marked by scars. How quaint. Tell me, creature, does she know how many innocents you've murdered? Does she understand what you are? He's under my protection, Margot said, stepping forward despite Evander's mental scream of warning through their bond. By right of blood covenant and the Ashford line, you have no authority here. The lead hunter laughed, cold and sharp. The Ashford line was meant to imprison this beast, not bond with it. You've perverted your sacred duty, witch. You'll be cleansed alongside him. The curse has been satisfied. Margot countered, her magic rising to the surface, making the air around her shimmer with power. Elena herself asked for mercy. Her mother built redemption into the curse's structure. What right do you have to supersede a witch's dying wish? Elena was a victim of manipulation. Another hunter spat, a young man whose zealotry burned in his eyes. This creature seduced her into betraying her own mother, then slaughtered her when his bloodlust proved stronger than his lies. Through the bond, Margot felt Evander's guilt surge, felt him almost accept their judgment as just. She pushed back with her own certainty, her own faith in who he'd become. You know nothing of what happened, she said, her voice ringing with authority that came from somewhere deep in her bloodline. I've seen the blood memories. I know the truth. Evander was a victim too, transformed against his will, driven mad by new instincts he couldn't control. He's paid for that night with 2 centuries of isolation and suffering. Suffering is not penance enough for murder. The silver-haired hunter raised her hand, and the chains tightened around Evander, making him cry out as the blessed silver burned his skin. The only proper end for a vampire is destruction. Then you'll have to destroy me first. Margot stepped into the circle, breaking their formation. The effect was immediate. The holy chains shattered, their power disrupted by her blood witch magic. Evander stumbled free, his skin marked with burns that were already healing, and moved to shield her with his body. Foolish girl. The lead hunter hissed. You've damned yourself with this creature. No. Margot raised her hands, and power crackled between her fingers, crimson lightning that matched the color of blood. I've saved him, and myself, and honored my family's true purpose. The Ashfords were never meant to be jailers. We were meant to be judges to determine when punishment becomes cruelty, when justice becomes vengeance. Heresy. The young zealot snarled, drawing a hawthorn stake. He lunged, but Evander was faster. He caught the hunter's wrist with inhuman speed, twisting until the stake clattered to the stone floor. But he didn't kill, didn't even draw blood. He simply held the man immobilized, his eyes pleading with Margot. Don't make me become the monster they believe I am, he said through their bond. Please, you won't have to. Margot's magic flared brighter, filling the chamber with light that made the hunters shield their eyes. By right of the Ashford bloodline, by the power granted to me through covenant and inheritance, I declare Evander Blackthorn's penance complete. His curse is satisfied. Any who seek his destruction from this moment forward act against the will of the witch who bound him and the judgment of her rightful heir. The words resonated with power that shook the very foundations of the catacombs. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the blue torches flared white-hot. When the light faded, the hunters were on their knees, forced down by magic older than their order. The covenant is recognized, the silver-haired hunter said through gritted teeth, and Margot realized with shock that the woman's eyes had gone pure white. She was speaking not with her own voice, but channeling something else. Something ancient. The Ashford witch has passed judgment. The blood bond is sanctified. The vampire Evander Blackthorn is released from eternal punishment into eternal service. The white faded from the hunter's eyes, and she slumped forward, gasping. When she looked up at Margot, there was no longer zealotry in her gaze, only wary respect. The old magic has spoken, she said quietly. We cannot oppose it. But know this, witch, you are responsible for every action he takes from this moment forward. His sins become yours. His hunger becomes your burden. I know, Margot said simply. I accept it freely. The hunters gathered their weapons and withdrew, leaving Margot and Evander alone in the ancient chamber. Evander pulled her into his arms, his body trembling despite his supernatural strength. Through their bond, she felt his overwhelming relief, his gratitude, and beneath it all, a love so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "You risked everything for me," he whispered against her hair. "No." She held him tighter. "I claimed everything that was already mine." The hunter attack should have been the end of their trials. But Margot woke the following evening to find Evander standing at the window of his private chambers, staring into the darkness with an expression she'd never seen before. Terror. "What's wrong?" She rose from the bed they now shared. Though he did not sleep, he held her through the night hours, learning the rhythm of her breathing, marveling at the warmth that had become his anchor. "She's here." His voice was hollow. "After all these centuries, she's finally come." "Ooh, the one who made me." He turned, and his eyes held a haunted quality that made Margot's blood run cold. "The vampire who transformed me, who murdered my wife, who set all of this in motion. I can feel her presence at the gates like a knife against my throat." Through their bond, Margot felt his fear, and beneath it, an unwelcome pull. The connection between a vampire and their maker was second only to a blood bond, an invisible chain that could compel obedience if the sire was strong enough. "She can't enter without invitation," Margot said, moving to his side. "Thornhaven's wards, we're designed to keep me in, not others out." Evander's hands clenched. "And she knows about you now." The hunter's failure would have spread through their network, and news travels quickly in the supernatural world. A blood witch bonding with a vampire. It hasn't happened in 3 centuries. "She'll want to see what you are, what we've become." A knock echoed through the manor, not at the front door, but somehow reverberating through every room simultaneously, a sound that bypassed physical barriers entirely. "Lord Blackthorn." A woman's voice called, melodious and terrible. "How rude to keep your maker waiting in the cold. And after I've come all this way to meet your little witch." Evander's jaw tightened. "I have to face her. If I don't, she'll find another way in, and I'd rather confront her on my terms. Then we face her together." Margot took his hand, feeling his cold fingers close around hers with desperate strength. They descended to the entrance hall where the great doors stood closed but vibrating with the pressure of the presence beyond. Evander opened them with obvious reluctance. The woman who stood on the threshold was breathtaking and horrifying in equal measure. She wore a gown of midnight silk that seemed to absorb light, her hair a cascade of ebony that moved as if underwater. Her face was perfect, too perfect, like a porcelain doll's beauty taken to an uncanny extreme. And her eyes were ancient, holding depths that made Evander's 200 years seem like childhood. "Me beautiful boy," she purred, her gaze raking over Evander with possessive hunger, still so deliciously tormented. "The curse suited you, suffering has always made you more exquisite." "Seraphine." Evander's voice was steady despite the tension radiating through their bond. "You're not welcome here." "How cruel." She pouted, though her eyes remained cold as starlight. "I created you. I gave you the gift of eternity. And this is how you greet me." Her attention shifted to Margot, and the weight of that gaze felt like being pressed beneath ice. "Eh, the Blood Witch. How quaint. Tell me, little mortal, do you truly believe a bond will protect you from what he is?" "He's not what you made him," Margot said, raising her chin despite the primal fear coursing through her veins. "He's what he's chosen to become." Seraphine laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Choice. Oh, darling child. Vampires don't choose. We are hunger-given form, predators wearing the mask of civilization. Evander may play at domestication for your amusement, but his nature will always win." She took a step forward, and though she hadn't been invited across the threshold, the wards shimmered but didn't stop her. Ancient vampires had their own ways around such protections. "I could take him from you." Seraphine continued conversationally. "Right now, one word in the language we spoke together, and he would be mine again, bond or no bond. The connection between maker and progeny predates your little blood covenant by millennia." Through their connection, Margot felt Evander fighting against the pull of Seraphine's presence, felt the part of him that recognized her as creator, as the source of his dark gift. It was instinct older than thought, and it terrified him, but where would be the sport in that? Seraphine circled them slowly, a predator evaluating prey. "No, I think I'll offer you a choice instead. A real choice. Not the pretty fiction you've built here in your cursed manor." She stopped before Evander, reaching up to trail one finger down his cheek. He flinched but couldn't move away, frozen by the power disparity between them. Come with me. Seraphine whispered. Leave this prison, this pathetic half-life you've carved out with your mortal pet. I can show you what you truly are. Not a cursed lord playing at redemption, but a prince of darkness with centuries of power waiting to be claimed. Together, we could rule the night as I always intended. No. The word tore from Evander's throat. No. Seraphine's eyes flashed crimson. You dare refuse me? I who gave you everything. You gave me nothing but suffering. Evander's voice strengthened, and Margot felt resolve crystallizing through their bond. You murdered my wife. You transformed me without consent. You created a monster and then abandoned it to madness. Every moment of agony I've endured, every death on my conscience, every century of isolation, all of it traces back to you. And yet you still exist because of me. Seraphine's hand moved to his throat, her nails elongating into claws. I could unmake you as easily as I made you, boy. Don't forget your place. His place is here. Margot stepped forward, her blood witch magic rising to meet the threat. With me. Bound by covenant and choice. You have no claim on him anymore. Seraphine's attention snapped to her with predatory focus. Bold words from such a fragile creature. Shall we test the strength of your precious bond? She moved with speed that defied perception, her hand suddenly wrapped around Margot's throat, lifting her off the ground. Evander roared, lunging forward, but Seraphine raised her other hand and he froze mid-motion, held by the Maker's command. Watch. Seraphine hissed, her fangs extending. Watch as I drain your little witch and show you the futility of seeking redemption. You are mine, Evander. You will always be mine. Her fangs descended toward Margot's exposed throat. But before they could pierce skin, crimson lightning exploded from Margot's hands, and Seraphine screamed. The blood magic that erupted from Margot wasn't her own. Not entirely. It was the accumulated power of 10 generations of Ashford witches, all the magic that had slept dormant in her bloodline, waiting for someone strong enough to wield it. And more than that, it was Evander's strength flowing through their bond, his 200-year accumulation of vampiric power now hers to command. Seraphine released her with a shriek, stumbling backward as crimson fire licked across her perfect skin. The ancient vampire's eyes widened in genuine shock, perhaps the first surprise she'd experienced in centuries. Impossible, she hissed. A blood bond shouldn't grant a mortal access to vampiric essence. The magic doesn't work that way. It does when the bond is freely given on both sides. Margot said, her voice resonating with power that seemed to come from the manor's very foundations. When it's built on love rather than domination. When it's a covenant, not a curse. The paralysis holding Evander shattered, and he was at Margot's side instantly, his hand finding hers. The moment they touched, their combined magic flared brighter, forming a shield of intertwined crimson and silver light. You've grown stronger than I intended. Seraphine admitted, circling them warily. Her earlier confidence had cracked, revealing calculation beneath. But you're still young, Evander. Still weak compared to what you could become under my tutelage. I don't want your kind of strength, Evander said, his voice carrying a conviction that resonated through Margot's entire being. I've spent 2 centuries learning that power without conscience is just another form of monstrosity. You taught me what I didn't want to be. He squeezed Margot's hand, taught me what I could become. A lapdog. Seraphine spat, bound and tamed, neutered of your true potential. A partner. Margot corrected. Free to choose his own path for the first time since you stole his humanity. Through their bond, she felt Evander's gratitude and love surge. Felt the truth of her words settle into him like a benediction. He'd spent so long believing he was nothing, but the monster Seraphine had created, the killer the curse had contained. But Margot saw him differently, saw the man who had emerged from suffering with his capacity for compassion intact, who had learned restraint not from chains but from conscience. This is your final chance, Seraphine said, her beauty twisting into something terrible. Reject this mortal, come with me, and I'll forgive your rebellion. Refuse, and I'll ensure every vampire in Europe knows you've bound yourself to a human. They'll hunt you both, tear you apart for the abomination you've created. Let them come. Evander's fangs extended, his eyes bleeding to black, but this time, Margot felt no fear in him, only fierce protectiveness. I've been alone for 200 years. I've faced the worst of myself and survived. Whatever threats you think hold power over me, they don't. Not anymore? Because you have love. Seraphine's laugh was bitter as ashes. Love is just another word for weakness, boy. It will destroy you far more certainly than I ever could. Then I'll be destroyed. Evander said simply. But at least I'll have lived first. Truly lived, not merely existed. That's more than you ever gave me. Seraphine's composure finally shattered completely. She lunged forward with all the terrible speed of an ancient vampire, her claws extended to rend and tear. But Margot was ready. She raised her free hand, and the silver scars on her throat blazed with light. Through their bond, she channeled not just her own power but the covenant itself, the sacred agreement between witch and vampire that predated even Seraphine's long existence. It was magic woven into the fabric of reality, older than nations, older than religions, older than the first humans who had learned to bind the creatures of darkness through blood and will. The light struck Seraphine mid-lunge, and she screamed, not in pain, but in rage and disbelief. "You cannot banish me," she snarled, fighting against the magic pushing her backward. "I am eternal. I am inevitable. I am nothing to us," Margot finished. "By right of blood covenant, by the power of the Ashford line, by the will of two souls bound in genuine love, I cast you out. You have no claim here, no power over him, no future with us." The words resonated with finality, and Seraphine was hurled backward through the open doors, unable to cross the threshold again. The wards that had contained Evander for 2 centuries recognized a greater threat and sealed against her, shimmering into visibility as curtains of silver fire. "This isn't over," Seraphine hissed from beyond the barrier. "I will return with others of our kind. I will tear down these walls and show you both the price of defiance. Then we'll be ready," Evander said, stepping forward to stand at the threshold beside Margot. Together, Seraphine's eyes promised vengeance, but she retreated into the darkness, her form dissolving into mist that the wind scattered across the moors. Silence fell over Thornhaven Manor. Margot sagged against Evander, suddenly exhausted from channeling so much power. He caught her easily, lifting her into his arms and carrying her back through the entrance hall toward the stairs. "Is she really gone?" Margot asked against his chest. For now, Evander's voice held grim certainty. "She'll regroup, gather allies, plan her next move. Ancient vampires don't forgive slights like this. But we have time to prepare, and we have something she doesn't." "What's that?" He looked down at her, and his smile, the third she'd seen and by far the most beautiful, transformed his entire face. "Each other. A bond she'll never understand because she's incapable of loving anything beyond her own power." They reached his chambers, their chambers now, and he laid her gently on the bed. The windows showed the first hints of dawn approaching, the sky lightening from black to deep blue. "I wish you could see it," Margot said softly, watching the colors shift. "The sunrise." Evander settled beside her, pulling her close. "I can see it reflected in your eyes. I can feel your wonder through our bond. That's enough for me, is it? Truly." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, tender and reverent. "I've spent 200 years in darkness, Margot. Alone, cold, convinced I deserved nothing but suffering. You've given me warmth, connection, purpose, and most impossibly love. The sunrise pales in comparison to that gift." Through their bond, she felt the absolute truth of his words, felt the depth of devotion that had grown between them in such a short time. It defied logic, defied reason, but it was real in a way that transcended both. "I love you," she whispered. "My vampire, my covenant, my eternity, and I love you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "My witch, my salvation, my dawn." Outside, the sun broke over the horizon, painting the world in shades of gold and rose. Inside Thornhaven Manor, a vampire and a witch lay entwined, bound by blood and choice and love. The curse had been satisfied. The covenant had been sealed. And eternity, at last, held promise instead of punishment. Margot Ashford and Evander Blackthorn remained at Thornhaven Manor, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. Though Seraphine never returned, other threats came, vampire covens seeking to test their unusual alliance. Hunters who refused to accept the old magic's judgment, supernatural creatures drawn by the power of their covenant, but they faced each challenge together. The Blood Witch and her bonded vampire, proving that love freely given could transform even the darkest curse into something beautiful. And on quiet nights when the moon rose over the Yorkshire moors, Evander would play Vivaldi on the piano while Margot read beside him, both marveling at the simple miracle of companionship after so many years alone. Some bonds, it seemed, were truly eternal.